Okay, so the 16th film in the MCU in chronological order is the first movie of Phase 4, and that is the Black Widow solo movie titled Black Widow. This movie takes place a week after the events of Civil War, and it follows Natasha Romanoff as she's on a mission to topple the Red Room, which is a facility that pretty much trained her to be the assassin that she became. While also doing so, she reunites with her estranged family. Okay, so before I talk about this movie, let me talk about the greater whole of Black Widow as a movie. This movie pretty much is 5 to 10 years way too late. This movie had no business coming out as the first movie of Phase 4. Number one, it doesn't really add anything to Phase 4, and it doesn't really add anything to the overall greater picture of the MCU, with the exception of maybe introducing some characters that you're going to see down the line. Other than that, this is the most throwaway story out of the entire MCU, and it really doesn't do anything to enhance the MCU at all. The only thing it does is give an origin story for how Natasha gets blonde hair and her vest. And like I said, it introduces the Red Guardian and her sister Yelena, and that's basically it. Doesn't do anything. This movie tries to be like the Winter Soldier, but it doesn't understand the Winter Soldier. And not only that, the sense of humor of this movie is just so random. It's gross in a lot of areas, and it's just not funny. And the action sequences in this movie, despite maybe 2 of them that are decently done, the rest of them are kind of forgettable, and there's no tension, and there's no stakes. Mainly because Natasha dies in Endgame. So why do I give a shit about a movie with her character now post her death? It makes no sense to me. This is why I make the case that this movie should have been released during Phase 3, and Captain Marvel should have been the opener of Phase 4. Instead, the way Marvel did it, it screwed everything up. So now we have a movie that comes out to start up a new phase of movies about a character who's dead. And she's barely... And not only that, she feels like a supporting character in her own movie because her sister Yelena has more of a character arc than she does. So with all that being said, let's just go through this movie, try and get it done as fast as possible. When it's all said and done, Black Widow is overall, it's decent. It's not the worst movie it's not the worst MCU movie, but it's the most just like forgettable story of the MCU. Like I said, it tries to be like the Winter Soldier, but it doesn't understand the Winter Soldier. It doesn't understand the complexities of that story. This movie tries to be a facsimile of the Winter Soldier, and it just doesn't work. Or it just works in a very half-assed way. The positive of this movie is that the cast in this movie is really solid. Scarlett Johansson, she's always good as the character of Black Widow, and she was good in this movie. I liked her. This movie, of course, came out during the reign of the MCU and Disney embracing so much political nonsense. But to this movie's credit, it didn't oversaturate with any really hardcore political views. But I mean, you could make a case that the character of Dreykov was like this woman-hating asshole, but that's how you want to interpret it. But at least Natasha wasn't like condemning any of the male characters or anything like that. and she was fine, and she was good in this movie. If anything, whenever Scarlett Johansson's on screen, she's one of the better parts of the movie. Even though I think this movie's story is just very lackluster. The supporting cast around her, they're all fine. David Harbour plays the Red Guardian, who's probably my favorite character in this entire movie, though I think he's extremely sloppily written. Rachel Weisz plays Melina, who is another Black Widow. She was fine in the role as well. Florence Poe plays Yelena, and I thought she was fine in the role. And her and Scarlett Johansson actually have some decent on-screen chemistry with one another. William Hurt returns to play General Thaddeus Ross, who made his return in Civil War. He's in this movie in a couple of scenes here and there, who is on the hunt to capture Black Widow, since she's now a fugitive from the law after helping Captain Rogers escape. So, he's just there. He's just peppered all throughout the movie. He's not really in it as a full-blown character. It's basically a glorified cameo. You got Ray Winstone, who is the character of Dreykov. Dreykov has got to be the most just uninteresting villain is definitely one of the most uninteresting villains of the MCU, with the most boring and plain and just forgettable motivations. Basically, he just wants to destroyed. He's just this power-hungry madman who just uses the Black Widows to do whatever he wants. He does not have the complexities of an Alexander Pierce, who is actually a very underrated MCU villain. Alexander Pierce, his motivations were done for a greater good. His whole thing was to have Hydra show power, and by doing that, he has to take away the freedom of others. But in his mind, it's for a greater good. General Dreykov's motivation in this movie is he just wants to get revenge on Black Widow for attempting to assassinate his daughter. But when you get to the end of the movie, you find out that she was never dead, and he's just using Black Widows just to do his bidding. His motivations are just completely confused, uninteresting, and boring. Ray Winstone, talented actor. He does his best to give Dreykov some personality and some charisma, but the villain is just so plainly drawn that he's easily one of the most forgettable aspects of this movie. He's barely in it. Ray Winstone is barely in this movie. He doesn't become a full-blown character till the last half hour. Other than that, everyone just talks about him and builds him up. And then when he actually becomes full-blown and has that face-to-face with Natasha, it's just, okay, kind of forgettable. And not only that, Natasha makes him look like a goofball anyway. It's stupid. What else? Yeah, and then the rest of the supporting cast are all okay. You know, Rick Mason's in this movie. He's like a handler for Natasha. The movie hints that he may have a crush on her, which I don't understand why we're doing this, because it's established that Natasha has a thing for Banner, as established in Age of Ultron. So why we're doing a ham-fisted pseudo-romance in this, which never goes nowhere, thank God, because it would have been dumb. But even the fact that you even teased it is just stupid. Doesn't make any sense. The action sequences in this movie. This movie has maybe 2 really good action sequences, and the rest are just flat out forgettable. The first one is when the Taskmaster first attacks Black Widow on the freeway. That was a decent action sequence. Nothing spectacular, but nothing great. It actually tries to mimic the Winter Soldier's introduction scene from when he attacked Fury. So, okay, that's whatever. And I like how we do get to see Taskmaster and what this character is all about. Basically, the Taskmaster is a character that has a photographic memory and can mimic the movesets of all his adversaries. Now, on paper, the Taskmaster could have been a cool villain for Black Widow to take on. When you actually get to the end of the movie and realize that the revelation is that it was Dreykov's daughter the entire time, it's just completely stupid and dumb. I did not like that. This movie would have been better if Dreykov just used Tony Masters, the real Taskmaster, just as an assignment to do mercenary work, instead of having this whole convoluted, twist of Dreykov's daughter still being alive, and it's just stupid. No, I kind of like the idea of Natasha feeling guilt that Dreykov's daughter legitimately died and she's not alive, and she has to wrestle with that. By having Dreykov's daughter still be alive, kind of takes away from Natasha coming to terms with something like that, because now she's alive. So what's the matter? What's the matter now? And the whole revelation was just flat out dumb and stupid. I would not have done that whatsoever. And then the other good action sequence is the whole prison break scene with the Red Guardian. It was okay for the most part. David Harbour is basically the best part of this entire prison break scene is David Harbour as the Red Guardian. He's absolutely hilarious. Like I said, his character is extremely inconsistent. He tries to make him somewhat likable, but like I said, the inconsistency of his character is weird. Because in one scene, he says that the job that he had being an undercover agent was boring, that he hated it. And then 2 seconds later, he shows genuine love for Natasha and Yelena. So I'm confused as to what you want me to take away from the character of the Red Guardian. I don't understand. Melina, she's probably one of the better out of the two. Melina's probably the better written one out of the bunch, and that's not really saying much. She seemed to genuinely do care about her daughters, but then again, she just viewed it again as an assignment. So that's basically it. Like Alexei and Melina, these are like the 2 most confused characters out of its entire movie, because, and on one hand, the movie wants you to buy to the fact that they care about these 2, and then on the other hand, it wants you to say that they didn't really care about these 2. It's like there's no middle ground. It seems forced and out of place, and you could have done so much with this adopted family aspect, especially when this movie has the opening prologue of young Natasha and young Elena in Ohio with Alexei and Melina. and the whole thing of them being of their cover being blown, and the girls having to go back to the red room, even though both Melina and Alexei do not want that to happen, but it happens anyway. And then you flash forward to the present day, and yeah, it's like, you could have done more by piggybacking off that prologue by staying more consistent with Alexei as a character. Like, yeah, instead of you turn him into like this joke who's doing these cringy jokes that are not really funny. I mean, the whole subplot of him thinking that he fought Captain America is actually kind of humorous, but that's basically it. And then other than that, he tries to give like these speeches, and they play off the emotional scenes for jokes. Like, again, this movie wants to be like the Winter Soldier, yet it has that cringy Marvel humor. If you're gonna be like the Winter Soldier, actually watch that movie and study how it paces its action and how it paces its humor. The humor never undercuts the tension in the Winter Soldier. This is one of those typical Marvel movies where the joke undercuts the tension, or if you're trying to do a serious scene, it's cut down by a really bad joke that just undercuts everything. For example, this is like during the whole breakout of Alexei in the prison, and when they're flying the helicopter, Yelena does this. They make a joke out of the widows using their ovaries and can't reproduce children, and they go into very, very vivid detail as to what they do. It's like, I don't want to hear this. Why is this in this movie? I don't need this crap. Like, yeah, this movie's humor is terrible. It is garbage humor. It's not funny in the slightest. Maybe you have some rib tickler moments here and there, but not enough. And like I said, it's not like this movie has the world's most interesting story, because it doesn't. Because when you piece it in the overall greater MCU, it's a filler side story that did not need to open Phase 4. This could have been a nice addition to Phase 3. This could have came out before Captain Marvel to bridge the gap to Endgame. Or, better yet, have this movie act as a follow-up to Civil War. Anything would have been better and of course, rework the story a little bit, make it more interesting and engaging instead of just this boring movie that you made out of commission. That's this movie's biggest flaw, is that it was made out of commission. You can tell that Marvel really didn't have any interest to do a Black Widow movie. They only did it out of obligation to Scarlett Johansson. Which is why, if they really care about Black Widow, it would have gotten released during Phase 3 and not Phase 4 as a throwaway movie. Which is what this movie is. This is a throwaway movie. I think the director, Kate Shortland, she's really bad at directing action sequences, but she's really good at directing the characters. And this movie's best moments are when these characters are just sitting down, talking to one another, having conversations. That's where she shines as a director, and that's where the acting actually shines too, because they're acting like real people. And some of the conversations are actually very engaging. For example, I like the first conversation that Natasha and Yelena had when they get reunited again. They act like real sisters, even though they're not real sisters. And when the whole family gets reunited again on Melina's farm, they act like a real family, even though they're not a real family. But it's the performances that make you care. See, your movie is confused when your script is saying one thing and yet the yet the performances are saying another thing. It's so disjointed, it doesn't make any sense. And then you get to the whole third act, where the whole thing takes place on the Red Room. It tries to be a recreation of Hydra's shield from Winter Soldier, and I'm not engaged. This is where Dreykov does the whole revelation of his daughter being Taskmaster the whole time, how she's basically like a human cyborg, because Dreykov had brainwashed her with a microchip or some shit to make her mimic other people's moves. Again, why couldn't this be Tony Masters, the man who has a natural gift the man who has a photographic memory and is a mercenary? It would have made more sense. Hell, it would have made sense if General Ross gave the Taskmaster the mission to apprehend Black Widow, while all the while the Taskmaster is playing Ross because he already has a deal with Dreykov to kill Black Widow. There are so many different directions you could have took this movie that would have made it slightly better. The whole thing of a whole army of Black Widows being controlled by a pheromone, it's whatever. It doesn't come into play in the greater MCU. When you put it into context, this movie does not leave no impression on the greater MCU, because the events of this movie are not even, obviously they're not going to be referenced because it came out after the fact, but still, you would think a story like this would be referenced when you watch it in chronological order, but it's not. But again, as a standalone movie for what it is, it's all right. It's nothing really all that spectacular. It's nothing really all that great. It's a decent little action movie. That's pretty much it. Honestly, truthfully, if you're going to give me a Black Widow solo movie, I rather would have a Black Widow Hawkeye movie and the events that took place in Budapest, which was actually the assassination of Dreykov and the death of his daughter. How that would have played out as an entire movie is more interesting than what I got with this, because what I got with this was kind of boring. Not only that, the Red Guardian, even though he's my favorite character, the guy doesn't have one full fight scene, which is a shame, because the movie teased the fight scene between him and the Taskmaster, and it just cut away before they can even fight, which is a shame and so stupid. And then you get to the end of the movie where everyone reunites, they all go their separate ways. Natalia gets her blonde hair and the stupid vest, and then you get the post-credit scene that pretty much sets up Hawkeye, and that's basically it. With Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who plays Val in Winter Soldier, telling Yelena that Clint Barton was responsible for Black Widow's death in the events of Endgame. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, at the end of the day, I'm just gonna give Black Widow a solid 6 out of 10. It's a middle-of-the-road movie. It tries to be like the Winter Soldier, but it doesn't understand the Winter Soldier. It has some decent things in it. This movie is really held together by the actors and the performances and the more human aspect of it. The whole action and superhero side of it and the overall story is just a jumbled, confused, and muddled mess that doesn't really add anything of value at all. So yeah, 6 out of 10 for Black Widow. Actually, no, screw that. This movie's a 5 out of 10. 5 out of 10 for Black Widow. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.